So welcome to Talking Money, episode 10. I can't believe we're 10 episodes deep already. That's pretty good going. So Hannah Godfrey, welcome back. We've got 3 stories to talk about this week, things going on in the world of personal finance, investing and money. And we're going to start with the return, possibly, of fallen star fund manager Neil Woodford. Now, I probably should offer some context on this story before we dive into what's happened this week. So Neil Woodford was a star fund manager with a company called Invesco Perpetual. He had a fantastic run. He delivered some incredible returns for investors. And then he left Invesco to set up his own business and his own funds. And he launched a fund called Woodford Equity Income. And it was quite different from the investment funds he'd been running at Invesco, the income and high income fund at Invesco Perpetual. And it went wrong, I think it's fair to say. So in 2019, the fund was closed because investors wanted to get money out, but some of the stocks, some of the companies in which Woodford had invested were smaller companies, were unlisted, so they weren't easy to buy and sell. And lots of people rushing for the doors at that time because they were worried about the performance of the fund. The fund had underperformed for about 2 years before this happened, and they couldn't get their money out. So it went wrong. About 300,000 investors lost a significant amount of money, and they've been receiving payments back as some of these unlisted illiquid funds have been sold off, companies have been sold off. So the administrator, Link, have been selling these off, paying money back to investors over time. I think they've had 4 payments now. The last one was in December. There's possibly a 5th due this year at some point. However, at the weekend in the Sunday Telegraph, Neil Woodford did an interview, and he's a fairly press-friendly fund manager, I think it's fair to say. He likes his interviews. And it was an interview in 2 parts. There was an apology, a sort of apology. He said sorry, but he also then tried to put the blame on the administrators and said, if they hadn't have closed my fund down, it would have recovered and I would have got the money back. But then he made an announcement. He said he was going to set up a new investment fund, and he's going to call it Woodford Capital Management Partners, based in Buckinghamshire and Jersey. And I think this has upset a lot of people. What have you seen about this in terms of people's reactions to the apology and to this news of the intention to establish a new investment fund?
In general, people are really not happy. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I would say in some cases furious. I think they find the apology very hollow, which I think is very reasonable. There are parts of the apology that he does blame Link, exactly what he said. He said, it wasn't my decision to shut the fund and I would have got the money back, which, okay. And then he says it wasn't just the retail investors that lost the money. Other people took the financial hit, and then sort of mentions that he has to sell this £30 million home that he has in the Cotswolds or somewhere like that. And it's very, very small violin, to say the least. And understandably, people are quite furious. I've seen some people making comments, this guy should be in jail. He shouldn't be operating this again. And they're really angry. And I think it's reasonable that they're angry. I mean, there are people, as you said, that haven't even got their money back from the first issue with the fund. And now he's kind of he's just planning this comeback, isn't he? But he hasn't planned it very well, because he hasn't, it appears, got any regulatory permission, and it's not a sensible way to go about things to kind of announce this comeback but not have regulatory permissions in place. And we can talk more about this in a second, because I think that will put a serious problem in place for him, a serious barricade. I think he might have issues, at least temporarily, getting regulatory permissions again, because there's actually an ongoing investigation at the FCA that has been, they've been doing it for some time, and I think they've admitted that COVID has slightly pushed it back because of everything that's been going on. But I wouldn't have thought, if you are being investigated by a regulator, that a regulator's going to go, oh, I see you're setting something new up. No problem, mate. Let's look at that then.
Off you go, have fun.
I don't, it just hasn't gone over well. It's come across as very, very insensitive. And even if he genuinely, very sincerely believes that he was making the right investment decisions, and to be fair, some of the trades that he made have actually made back some money, it transpires. I think he's about 600 million up or something along those lines. So maybe he has the tiniest of points. That's not to say it's a full point, but maybe there's some argument there. If you have essentially caused people to lose this much money, surely you kind of take it on the chin and you give a sincere apology, and you don't sit there and go, well, okay, I apologize, but it was really this person's fault. You grow up, you deal with it, and you say, I'm so sorry, this will not happen again.
Yeah. When I was growing up, I was taught that the way to apologize was to make it an unreserved apology. So you don't caveat your apology with, yeah, I'm sorry, but. Yeah, as soon as you say that word but, you've got it wrong, haven't you? And it clearly is upsetting an awful lot of people, investors who have lost money, who feel they were following this star fund manager into his new venture and he was going to repeat his previous success, which he failed to do. And as you say, this is still subject to failure. It was only 2019, quite late in 2019. This is still subject to an FCA investigation. So why he or his PR people thought it was sensible to simultaneously apologize and announce this intention to set up a new fund. Now, I should say this intention for a new fund, this isn't for retail investors again. This is now for institutional investors. And the first business he's saying he's going to be working with is called Acacia. I think it was Acacia Research, who are a US-based investment firm. They have purchased the portfolio of life science companies that was previously owned by Woodford Equity Income Fund. So this is where it gets a bit complicated. But they picked them up in a bit of a fire sale when Link had to sell them off. And he's now going to want to act as their advisor, as you say, the value of those companies is starting to recover. So I can see, not an investor in that fund. We didn't advise our clients to get into it because we could see it was much higher risk than the previous Invesco proposition. But I can see why people are really upset by this, because you're reading in your Sunday newspaper that the chap who's lost you an awful lot of money is going to give it another go and head out there and set up a new business.
I have a regulatory question as well that I don't know the answer to, but you might. One of the major issues with the Woodford Equity Income Fund was that it was invested in these kind of small cap, very liquid companies. Now, I assume that you are allowed to do that to an extent, but if my memory serves me correctly, and this is a big if, wasn't he too invested in these companies, which then caused this massive problem and was really kind of actually the demise of this fund? I think had he just performed badly, maybe it would have been gated for a while. It happened. Funds do get gated from time to time. It's happened in property funds quite recently.
Yeah.
But if was he allowed to do that regulatorily?
Yeah. So the issue I think arose because as investors left, he had to sell assets in the fund to pay those investors who were leaving. So he was selling off the bigger companies that were easy to trade, that were liquid. And as a result, the proportion of smaller micro cap companies, the illiquid stuff, the unlisted stuff, was growing and growing. And that's when it breached this limit. So he was allowed to have some unlisted companies in there, but when he sold off the big stuff, it left more of the small stuff in the fund. But from a regulatory perspective, and I said this to you, Hannah, before we started recording, the last thing you do if you want to set up a regulated business, and an investment fund is a regulated business, but the last thing you do is tell the world you're doing it before you've got permission from the regulator. So you always speak to a regulator first. You get their permission in principle, at least, to make that pre-application. And I found it quite entertaining that yesterday evening, we're recording this on Wednesday, so Tuesday evening, the Financial Conduct Authority put out a statement after 9 o'clock in the evening. So clearly somebody was having to work late to catch up with this, and that's going to upset them too if they're having to stay behind and work late on it. But they said that they've been in touch with the Jersey Financial Services Commission. They're sharing information about what's going on with the previous investigation. And then today, about an hour before we start recording, the Jersey Financial Services Commission, the regulator in Jersey, say they are disappointed to see the announcement in advance of an application for authorization. So he's not just upset the regulator in London, he's upset the regulator in Jersey, which is where he was hoping to work out of as well. And that can't put him in a good position. Possibly he may now fail to get authorization in either of these two jurisdictions.
Well, that's exactly my thought. I wonder if this project is dead in the water before it's even had the chance to take off, because he hasn't done what is typically to be done. Obviously, I've never been a regulated entity, but I assume there has to be a lot of back and forth. You can't make assumptions. I assume you have to give the regulators all sorts of bump to look at to check that you're legitimate and that you don't have a kind of murky past, because I don't think they take very kindly to that. And I have no idea how much of just angering the FCA or the Jersey regulator would actually impact him getting regulated. I suspect it would be a slap on the wrist rather than an absolute no, you're not doing this. But I can't see him getting regulatory permissions until this investigation is over. And how long that will take, I imagine it will be sped up now because it's slowed down a little bit, but I'm sure it will be one of those items that suddenly goes right to the top of the FCA's list of things to do. But I can't see them granting it just yet. And I mean, how long is it going to take this investigation to conclude? I have no idea.
Well, the authorization process for any regulated business can be quite lengthy anyway. It can take 6 to 9 months. So it's not an overnight process as it stands. I think you're quite right. I think going to the press like this and making this sort of half-hearted apology and then announcing his big plans, I think would have prioritized the investigation. So he's probably shot himself in the foot there anyway. And they're likely to, because there's now much more public interest in what's going on, and it's been headlines for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and today. So I think the public interest is going to drive the regulator to take action more swiftly. And whether that changes their impartiality and it makes it harsher action, I can't say. But I'm finding it both fascinating and mildly entertaining. Obviously, not funny for any of the investors who have lost money, who are now seeing this chat pop up on their TV screens and making this sort of faux apology and then telling the world he's going to go back and make millions of pounds again.
And I wonder as well if the FCA, I really am spitballing here because I really very sincerely do not know exactly how this works at the FCA, but they have been accused in the past on multiple occasions of being a bit of a toothless regulator and not doing their jobs properly and not coming down hard enough when they had to. And I almost wonder if this kind of offers them something on a plate to come down really hard on when there is so much media interest and there's so much public anger about it. I mean, can you imagine them just letting him off and essentially and that would not be a good look for them. So there's kind of a vested interest there as well to take a really hard long look at this and to be very, very, very critical, I think, of whatever this new fund or this new company he's setting up is. I think as well, it's just from a journalist perspective, it's done the job, it's certainly in the headlines, but it seems a weird marketing strategy to announce all this and then to know that you're not going to get permissions for, like you said, it could be 6 to 9 months under ordinary circumstances if you're not being investigated. So it seems odd to kind of drum up all this media talk about it and then have everything go very, very quiet again, possibly for a long time. It seems a weird strategy.
See, I always take the view that when someone of his, I guess, status and experience and wealth, undoubtedly, does something like this, that possibly they're being clever and there was some intention behind it and they anticipated this sort of press commentary, they anticipated the response from a regulator. So are they playing chess here? Is there some big strategy behind it, or am I overthinking that and actually have they just made a very big PR mistake? It could be either of those, I don't know.
I honestly, but I'm so fascinated to find out.
Yeah. And there's a book about it as well called When the Fund Stops, and it's by a chap called David Ricketts, who's a personal finance journalist, and it's on my reading list. But if you want to go back and sort of check out the backstory of all of this, he's done a fantastic job of investigating it and explaining exactly what happened and why it happened. So we'll come back to this at some point, I'm sure, because I doubt this is the end of the story. I think at least we're going to get quite a fascinating investigation out of it and some interesting headlines there as well.